Welcome to the Grease Goblins Rereads channel. Today's video we're going to be doing episode 12 of the A Storm of Swords reread with Jaime 2. Now, I will say right away, a little bit different of a setup today just because my laptop was being a piece of crap. It's pretty old and it didn't charge, so I have to be able to see my notes, so we're going to use the normal live stream setup. So, with all that being said, let's get into Jaime 2, because, again, I think another strong chapter from George with the Storm of Swords, especially with Jaime being one of the best point of views in the series, and we're going to start on page 120. Jaime is the first to spot an inn along the river as the group travels downstream. The inn sits on the south bank where the river bends with a stone lower floor. Whitewashed wooden upper story, slate roof, stables, and a vine-covered arbor. Its layout seems designed to welcome travelers arriving by water. Jaime notices that there is no smoke coming from the chimneys and no light visible in the windows, suggesting that the inn may be abandoned. So right away with this inn, we know that we're going to come here a couple of times. Arya will come here in her next chapter in this book, which we'll be getting to very shortly. And also, with this inn, it's very interesting because in peace times, this seems like it would have been a very inviting inn, but now because of the war, you see how changed it truly is. It almost feels abandoned, but it's not actually. And even the people that are going to be running this inn are not actual innkeeps. The people that once had lived here are now dead. But it's also a very significant inn, which we're going to find out in terms of the history and, again, building the lore of this world. That's something that George has continued to do throughout this book, as he's really started to lean into more of, I would say, the Targaryen history itself. A lot of things that we'd find with Fire and Blood specifically really starts to come out in A Storm of Swords. My cat Rhea has decided to join us for the chapter, so say hi to her, and let's continue. Sir Cleos Frey remarks that the inn was open the last time he had traveled here, and remembers it for its particularly good ale, as Brienne warns that there still could be people inside, either hiding or dead. Jaime mocks her caution, asking whether she is afraid of a few corpses. When Brienne begins correcting him, Jaime deliberately interrupts her, already knowing her name. So a lot here is still in the relationship of Jaime and Brienne. Jaime is not so careful the way Brienne is. Brienne is much younger, she's much more inexperienced in the world, and you come upon this site where, do you really want to investigate this inn where people likely have been killed? Should you just keep going? And I think that's the debate you have here, and the debate that has to go through your mind a ton, because every interaction could spell your death. Jaime argues that spending the night at the inn would be safer and more comfortable than remaining exposed on the river, and suggests they investigate what happened there. Without directly agreeing, Brienne steers their skiff toward the dock. Sir Cleos lowers the sail and jumps ashore to secure the boat, as Jaime follows those chains, making moving awkward and difficult. At the end of the dock, Jaime notices a weathered sign depicting a kneeling king offering fealty. Recognizing the symbol, Jaime laughs and remarks that they could not have found a more fitting inn for their circumstances. So we're going to get into what that inn actually means and the sign means in the next page, but I do think there is some sense to this, because with them being exposed on the river, there's no place to hide. You know, if they're spotted, people could hunt them down, they don't have the numbers to fight back. So going on foot, kind of similar to what Arya's trying to do with her band of people, it could be easier. So there is a lot of sense to that. And if the inn is abandoned, it could be a place that you could try and settle down for a night and have some sort of protection. So there's a lot of sense to this, but you are taking risks. And that's really what every decision is about when you're kind of trying to navigate this war-torn country. Something that, you know, House of the Dragon obviously has been going on as of recording this, and I don't think has done a great job depicting things like that. But getting into page 121, Brienne does not recognize the significance of the inn, so Sir Cleos explains that it is the Inn of the Kneeling Man, built on the spot where King Torrhen Stark, the last king in the north, submitted to Aegon the Conqueror. Jaime adds that Torrhen marched south after the defeat of the other kings at the Field of Fire, but wisely chose surrender after seeing Aegon's dragons, an overwhelming army. Just building up, obviously, Aegon's conquest, but I think there's some interesting stuff here right away. When you think about Robb Stark and his position, and we're going to get to a Catelyn chapter here soon in the next few weeks, where we're going to look at Robb's campaign, and there is an argument. Should he bend the knee at this point? You know, he's losing all of his support. Should he take the wise decision and bend the knee? And the other thing is, Robb has come all the way south and he's declared himself a king. But now, really, his plan is going to be banking on trying to get back north, as Robb has lost it. I think it's a lot of interesting symbolism to that, but obviously there's more to it than that, with Jaime being the last man to kill a Targaryen king. So there's a lot of interesting ideas you can bring about with why George decided to make this in that name for a lot of our characters and the themes of the story. But while speaking, Jaime hears a horse in the stable and realizes the inn is not completely abandoned. Seeing an opportunity to potentially escape if a horse is available, Jaime heads inside without waiting for Brienne or Cleos. As soon as he opens the door, he finds himself facing a loaded crossbow wielded by a stocky teenage boy. And this gets to what I was saying earlier. Everything is a risk. It may look abandoned, but who knows? What if this teenage boy had just shot Jaime and killed him without even waiting for Jaime to respond? What if this had been just a trap? And there is a lot of that, but you do have to take these risks to try and feed yourself, to get protection, and to try and go unnoticed. The boy immediately demands to know whether they are lions, fish, or wolves, asking where their loyalties lie in the war. Jaime jokingly replies that they were hoping for Capon rather than choosing a side. He remarks that crossbows are cowardly weapons, but the boy points out they can still kill a man. As Jaime counters that even if the boy shoots him, Sir Cleos would kill him before he could reload. Now, one thing I will say, yeah, obviously, archers and crossbowmen are not looked upon fondly, especially in chivalry and battles and stuff. But between life or death, we're in the war-torn Riverlands. Do you think this boy cares? He's 15 years old, I believe, is how old they say this boy. Is he really going to be able to fight a grown man? Not everybody's Jaime Lannister, not everybody's Loras Tyrell. So that is the practicality of it. But even if, let's say, this boy was to kill Jaime, well, who's to say he doesn't have a dagger or something? He's going to try and defend himself. The other thing you need to know is, who is to say he's the only one here? There could be other people hidden. So yeah, obviously trying to defend their home, which isn't really their home. They've taken it from someone else at this point. But yeah, Jaime is right. Practically, that's the issue with having a crossbow. It's kind of like a one-trick pony if there's a swordsman anywhere near you. Sir Cleos tells Jaime not to frighten the boy, while Brienne assures him they mean no harm and offers silver in exchange for food and drink. The boy notices Jaime's chains and asks why he is imprisoned. Jaime casually replies that he killed some crossbowmen and asks whether the inn has ale. The boy confirms they have ale, but orders Brienne and Cleos to surrender their weapons first. Looking through the window, the boy notices their Tully sail and recognizes they have come from River Run. It's got to be a very interesting sight, especially for a young boy. You see one man who just comes bursting into your inn, who has no care in the world, but he's also chained up. He seems to be a prisoner. He did something. You have Cleos, who's the only one of the three that looks like your traditional, okay, this is maybe a knight or some lord or something like that. And then you have Brienne, who's a woman, but is built like a huge individual, who also has knight kind of clothing on. It's got to make for a very fascinating sight. And so a million questions must be going through your head. What's actually happening here? And then you look out the window and you're going, okay, well, they had to have come from River Run based on where they were coming down the river and this Tully sail. So who are they transporting? And that's kind of the issue you run into if you're ever seen by people. How do you explain this mismatch of people? And that's what they're going to have to try and explain here. Brienne and Cleos remove their sword belts and drop them to the floor as another man emerges from a cellar carrying a large butcher's cleaver. He has a pockmarked, unhealthy appearance and immediately offers them horse meat. The man explains that the horse was old and tough, but the meat is still fresh. When Brienne asks about bread, he admits they only have hard bread and stale oat cakes. Jaime is amused by the man's honesty, joking that most innkeepers serve bad food, but do not admit it so openly. The man reveals that he is not the innkeeper. He explains that the real innkeeper and the woman of the inn are dead, and that he buried them behind the inn. As Jaime immediately asks the obvious question, did you kill them? So we're in this kind of feeling out process. They asked Jaime's party a lot of questions. They kind of deflected. Now they're going to ask a bunch of questions. Well, you don't seem like much of an innkeep. You don't have great food besides this horse meat. Well, are you going to kill us if we lay down our arms? So it's a bit of that feeling out process. You can't just blindly trust anyone. I mean, that's something that really eats away at Brienne, and especially when we see her in A Feast for Crows. because of her background and the way that she's been treated by men specifically, you see that really play out in the next book. And so I think that's something that's really interesting that George does all throughout this book, is to start to build up that process with the character of Brienne and how she views the world. She starts to become a lot more like Jaime, and that's one thing that I think this book does a great job is both Brienne and Jaime rub off on the other. They start to become more like the other person. As we get into page 122, the man responds evasively when Jaime asks whether he killed the innkeeper and the woman, arguing that if he had done it, he would hardly admit to it. He blames either wolves or lions, saying there's little difference between them. He explains that he and his wife found the bodies already dead and simply took over the inn afterwards, considering it theirs now. When Sir Cleos asks about the man's wife, he grows suspicious and refuses to say much, only noting that she is away and warning that their welcome depends on how much silver they carry. Now, right away, there's a bunch of interesting ideas here, because one, you can't trust the fake innkeeper and this boy, because obviously there's some suspicious stuff going on here. You know, you have horses outside. How did you get those? You have this inn that obviously is not yours. So did you just kill these people and you're now taking over their business? Especially with war, it raises a lot of questionable morality. And the idea that they're not even really shying away from that is kind of telling. And that's going to go to dictate this conversation in the future as well. When this fake innkeep is telling you advice, like obviously you can't listen to it because you don't really trust them. And the other thing is with context, and we know this from Arya's next chapter, these people are working with the Brotherhood without banners. And regardless of what you want to say about the Brotherhood at this point of the story, in a lot of ways, they are just a band of rogue men that have no real loyalty to anyone. And they will rob you. They'll try to say, oh, here's some paper. But like, that is the idea here, is that these people are definitely trying to take advantage of Brienne, Jaime, and Cleos. Brienne tosses him a silver coin, which he bites to test before pocketing. The boy with the crossbow immediately reveals that Brienne has more money, drawing attention to their resources. The man then sends the boy into the cellar to fetch some onions. Sir Cleos asks whether the boy is his son, but the man explains that he is not. He and his wife took the boy in after the child lost his mother to the bloody mummers. He reveals that one of his own sons was killed by Lannister forces and another died of illness, adding that in wartime, a man needs someone to stand watch while he sleeps. That's one thing that you look at with medieval times, especially, is, now this isn't a perfect one-to-one situation, but even think about farmers, especially in medieval times. They would love to have a lot of children because that's extra hands to work the fields, to try and be able to live, to be able to afford to have food and all the necessities you need in life. And so obviously there's a lot of wisdom in that. Having more people around you that you can trust, that means you can sleep. That means you can do all this stuff. So that makes a lot of sense to me overall. I think it's pretty realistic. But also the idea that the boy picks up on, oh, how much coin do they truly have? It's interesting because that's something that I feel like people that are like robbers or people involved with the Brotherhood without banner would kind of figure out, oh, okay, let's send them into this trap because it's going to be very profitable for us. Type idea. I think there's a lot of foreshadowing in this chapter to what we're going to see with Arya's chapter. The travelers then sit down to eat while the man prepares a meal of charred horse meat, fried onions, cooked in bacon grease, and stale oatcakes. Jaime and Cleos drink ale while Brienne chooses cider, and throughout the meal the boy remains wary, sitting atop a barrel with a loaded crossbow across his knees. The man joins them with a tankard of ale and asks for news from Riverrun, assuming Sir Cleos is the group's leader. And obviously, especially in this medieval world and fantasy, women are not predominantly the people in charge. You know, ladies are always at the beck and call of the lords usually. Women are not knights. So obviously you would turn to Cleos because he's the only man that's not in chains and is like, kind of looks like a knight. And already you kind of see that just in that subtle way that George introduces this conversation. Cleos reports that Lord Hoster Tully is dying, but that Edmure Tully continues to hold the fords of the Red Fork against the Lannisters. He notes that battles are being fought throughout the Riverlands and asked where they are traveling. Cleos says they are bound for King's Landing, and that's going to be very interesting. So you have these people that are alleged coming from Riverrun, and they're going to King's Landing. Why would they be doing that? Especially if they are people loyal to House Tully, why would you be going to the place where the Lannisters are? And I think that really is interesting because also they have a prisoner. So, in my mind, if I was like this innkeep or fake innkeep, I should say, I'd be thinking, oh, okay, is this like a exchange of prisoners, of hostages? Now, obviously, you're not going to jump to the conclusion that this is Jaime Lannister they have, but that's what I'd probably be thinking. Like maybe this guy is some lesser knight or lesser lordling's son. That's what I would be assuming. But yeah, the man reacts with disbelief, calling them fools, because the last news he heard claimed that King Stannis was outside the city with a vast army. And hearing this, Jaime silently reacts with anger and frustration, wishing he were free of his chains so he could deal with Stannis himself. The man warns them to avoid the King's Road, describing it as extremely dangerous. According to him, the roads are plagued by both wolves and lions, as well as bands of broken men, displaced soldiers, and outlaws who prey on anyone unfortunate enough to cross their path. And what we're going to see from Brienne later on in this chapter is really relevant here. Why does this man care about their journey so much? Why does he care about what they're doing? And obviously, news does not travel very fast. The Riverlands are not very far away from King's Landing, but even now, they still don't know that Stannis has been defeated by Tywin and the Lannisters and the Tyrells. They're still working on very old news, Edmure's still holding the Red Fork, all that stuff. Like, that happened a while ago now at this point, but that's how slow news is to travel, especially when you're at this random inn that nobody really has been going to. But also, there is some wisdom in what the man is telling them. Like, obviously, he is trying to bait them into a trap, but at the same time, he is right. Like, the roads are plagued by all these different soldiers and broken men. We saw that all throughout Arya's story in the last book. As we get into page 123, Sir Cleos dismisses the threat of outlaws, arguing that armed men have nothing to fear from common bandits. The man at the end points out that from his perspective, the group consists of only one armed man, a woman, and a chained prisoner, making them far less intimidating than Cleos suggests. Brienne visibly dislikes being referred to as a woman in that context, something that Jaime notices with amusement. But meanwhile, Jaime remains preoccupied with his chains, twisting at them and feeling the raw, chafed skin beneath the iron manacles. Brienne explains her intended route: follow the Trident to the sea, find horses at Maidenpool, and then ride through Duskendale and Rosby to avoid the main fighting. The inn's new owner warns that they will never reach Maidenpool by river because burned and sunken boats have partially blocked the channel downstream. If you're Brienne, you probably shouldn't be telling this man your plans to begin with, but you are asking, does he know things, right? Can he help you with what is the situation like in the Riverlands? And this is something Brienne will acknowledge in this chapter as well, that, they can't take that risk. If he's telling them the truth, if he's not, they don't know, that's a huge risk to take. So they will eventually go on land, but that'll also lead to its own risks as well. The man explains that outlaws now prey on travelers near the wrecks as well as around the Skipping Stones and Red Deer Island. He also warns of Lord Beric Dondarrion, known as the Lightning Lord, who moves unpredictably through the region. When Sir Cleos asks who this Lightning Lord is, the man explains that Beric earned the name because he strikes suddenly and disappears just as quickly. He adds that many people believe Beric cannot die. You start to see more of the forming of who is Beric Dondarrion now? Who are the Brotherhood Without Banners? Because in the second book, we'd had only slight foreshadowing to them, but we hadn't really started to puzzle out who are these people. Obviously, they're made up of the band of men that Ned had sent to go get the mountain, but we haven't had much foreshadowing or building into who they are up to this point. Jaime privately dismisses the idea, believing any man can be killed with a sword through the body. Jaime asks whether Thoros of Myr still rides with Beric, and the man confirms that Thoros remains at Beric's side and notes rumors that the Red Priest possesses strange powers. Jaime recalls Thoros from King's Landing, remembering him more as a hard-drinking companion of Robert Baratheon than a mysterious sorcerer. And Jaime is right to question this, because Thoros has kind of been a joke up to this point. He hasn't had any type of real powers. He's kind of been this fake priest. But you get even more foreshadowing there from the innkeep. And obviously, this innkeep guy, he knows more than he's letting on. He knows about the Brotherhood because he works with them. And so this is also telling us, the audience, that Thoros might actually be growing in his powers. There might be more to what's being said here, and I really love the way that that's subtly done in this chapter. And it also goes to build the character of Thoros as well. Obviously, we're going to see Thoros in this book, but it's nice that we kind of get a bit of, oh, who is the character before we meet him? What's the perception of him? It's kind of the same thing that George did with like Stannis in book 1. Based on everything that Jaime has heard, Jaime suggests that continuing down the Trident may not be their safest option. The innkeeper agrees and warns that even beyond the outlaw bands, the Ruby Ford remains dangerous and contested. He says the crossing is reportedly held by Roose Bolton's men, the Leech Lord's wolves, though control may have changed since then. According to him, the ford can now be held by wolves, lions, barracksmen, or anyone else, and Brienne suggests that perhaps no one controls it at all. I would not be banking my thesis on, oh, somebody is not holding a very strategic point. Given we're at war, the innkeep is kind of right to say, like, oh, who knows who has it, but someone has it, more than likely. And we know right now that the Lannisters, for the most part, have retreated south. Now, they will be coming back north eventually, but as of right now, Roose Bolton has most of the power and control of the southern regions of the Riverlands that eventually the Lannisters will be coming back for. And obviously, this is more set up to where Jaime and Brienne are going. They're going to eventually get to Harrenhal and to Roose Bolton, so it's just building up that where they are going is where Arya is leaving. The man responds that he would not risk his life on such a hope and advises them to abandon the river route altogether. Instead, he recommends traveling overland, avoiding major roads, hiding in forests at night, and staying out of sight as much as possible. But even then, he warns that survival is far from guaranteed. Brienne appears uncertain about the suggestion and points out they would need horses. Jaime immediately notes there are horses available, reminding everyone that he heard at least one horse in the stable when they arrived. There's a lot of wisdom in what this man is telling them, because going across land, to me, is a lot safer. You can hide. It's a lot easier to avoid people watching you, right? When you're on this river route that a lot of people would take in peace times, there's obviously going to be people watching those lanes. And eventually, when you lead to where maybe there's some outlaws, maybe there isn't, you have a lot of risks. And so there is a lot of intelligence with what is being said. The problem you do run into for Brienne is, well, now you'd be on foot. And 2, do you have the supplies for a longer venture? Because obviously going on land is going to take longer than going by river. So they're going to try to figure out if they can get these horses, if they're decent horses or whatnot, in the next page or two. Getting into page 124, the man again insists that the 3 horses are not for sale, prompting Jaime to laugh and confidently predict that they will inspect them anyway. Everyone has a price. And that's a little bit of Jaime's background. You see that with Tyrion as well. Everything can be bought for the right amount of gold. And this is something that'll also get Jaime into trouble in this book. Brienne reluctantly agrees and follows the man to the stable is filthy and long neglected, filled with horse dung and swarms of flies. Only 3 horses remain, a heavy brown plow horse, an old white gelding that is blind in one eye, and a lively dapple gray palfrey suitable for a knight. The man explains how he acquired them. The plow horse was already at the inn when he and his wife took over. The white gelding wandered in on its own, and the boy caught the gray palfrey running loose while saddled and bridled. He shows him that the palfrey saddle, which is decorated with silver inlay, the saddle's cloth, original colors are obscured by dirt and dried blood. Jaime immediately recognizes the bloodstains and concludes that the horse's former master is dead and will not be returning to claim it. So obviously with these horses, they come with varying quality. And this kind of goes to build the idea that who is this fake innkeep guy and this boy and his alleged wife? They have a horse that obviously probably belonged to a knight or someone more highborn. So how did they get it? Did they kill the person? Did they just stumble upon this horse after maybe a battle had happened? A lot of questions. And again, it leads you to just not believe everything you're being told here. And Jaime's picking up on that very easily. You also have the other 2 horses, which are not great conditioned horses, especially when you're looking for stealth and reliability. But if you're going to go out across land, you have to take what you're given. After inspecting the animals, Jaime estimates their value, suggesting a gold dragon for the gray palfrey with a saddle, a silver coin for the plow horse, and joking that the man should pay them to take the old white gelding. Brienne ignores Jaime's appraisal and instead offers a full gold dragon for each horse. The man initially reaches for the gold, but hesitates, pointing out that coins are less useful than horses when one needs to travel or flee. To sweeten the offer, Brienne includes their skiff in the bargain, allowing him to travel either up or down the river. Now, I want to point this out for a second because I think if this innkeep was a little bit more intelligent, he would start to put a lot of things together here. How many people do you run into that have actual armor on? Cleo's Frey looks fairly decently richly dressed. They're willing to overpay for your horses, and Jamie, the prisoner, can tell you the exact values of all these horses. You should start to put together that there's definitely some highborn people being involved here. And that would start to lead you to some questions here. Who are you? Now, obviously the innkeep probably doesn't care at this point because he's realizing he's going to send them into a trap. And then that trap eventually they'll find out anyway. But there's a lot of questions here that become very fascinating. But you also have to be thinking, if you're this man, what good does gold do me right now? At this inn, he's not really next to any of these big towns or cities that he's going to be able to buy things. Horses, as of right now, have way more value than gold does. And this is kind of where I think in the man's head, the gears are turning. Okay, send these men into the trap. I won't lose the horses anyway, and I'll get some of the gold. I think it makes sense from his perspective. It's not morally very good, but you can kind of understand where that plan is coming from. The man then bites one of the gold coins to verify it is genuine and appears satisfied. Jamie comments that Brienne is being badly overcharged, and Brienne continues negotiating, requesting provisions as part of the deal. The man offers more oatcakes and some smoked salt fish, but makes clear that the food will cost extra. Pleased with the 3 gold dragons, he pockets them and notes that lodging will also cost money if they intend to spend the night. He assumes they will want to stay at the inn until morning before setting out with their newly purchased horses. It all just seems a little too sweet, and that is what kind of Jamie's picking up on. Brienne right now, the reason she's willing to give up more than what the value is she understands this man really doesn't want to get rid of these horses, because they pose the idea of okay, let's say some people try to raid his inn. He can get out on these horses and run away. Here, it's kind of the cost of war. And also, Brienne kind of just wants to be done with this. She's going to pay the gold dragons and just be on their way. So you kind of understand that. But yeah, again, he's trying to now bait them into staying the night, which obviously would help the Brotherhood Without Banners, maybe even catch them then. So you obviously see the innkeep is trying to play them. He's trying. He's got multiple avenues of strategy for how he can trap them. As we get into page 125, Brienne immediately rejects the innkeeper's offer to stay the night, insisting they continue traveling. The man warns that riding at night through unfamiliar country on unfamiliar horses is dangerous and can lead to accidents. Brienne remains firm, arguing that the bright moonlight will make travel safe enough. The man lowers his offer, suggesting that even a few coppers would secure beds and freshly washed, flea-free coverlets. Sir Cleos is clearly tempted by the prospect of a proper night's rest and argues that they would travel faster the next day if refreshed. But Jamie unexpectedly supports Brienne's decision to leave immediately, explaining that they still have promises to keep and a long journey ahead. Now, this is very interesting as well. Why all of a sudden is this man starting to get a bit desperate? Why does he want them to stay the night so much? That is really odd, because earlier with the horses, he seemed very reluctant to part from them, but now all of a sudden, he's going, hey, I'll lower my price so you stay the night. Something isn't adding up there, and even Brienne and Jamie are starting to kind of piece that together, right? We've gotten the horses, let's go. Let's make our own camp. Even though it might be more convenient to stay here, something might be up. Let's not take the risk. It's all about risk management in this chapter, especially when you're in a war-torn country. You can also see it you're taking a lot of risks here. It's just kind of sweet in the idea of, hey, stay the night. But it's a very interesting and nuanced conversation that George has here. Jamie notes that riding will be difficult while his ankles remain chained together and suggests that something can be done about the irons. The man points out there's a smithy behind the stable, and Brienne takes Jamie to the smithy and uses a hammer and chisel to split the chain connecting his ankle shackles, freeing his legs. Jamie hopes she will also remove the chains on his wrists, but Brienne refuses and ignores his suggestion. While helping saddle the horses and prepare their packs, the man gives Brienne the directions for the road ahead. Brienne is still not trying to have Jamie fully freed. She's not trusting him, and she's right to do so. Jamie consistently thinks about killing her, about riding off and abandoning them. Brienne is very much in the right to be very cautious of how to handle Jamie. But at this, the man warns them that 6 miles downriver they will find a burned village where the road divides. One route leads south to Sir Warren's stone tower house, but the man advises against going that way because Sir Warren is dead and he does not know who controls the castle now. Instead, he recommends taking a woodland track that runs south by east, considering it the safer route. As we get into page 126, again, why does this man care so much, right? You've paid him for the horses and all this stuff. Why is he so desperate to instruct you of where to go or to stay the night? And obviously it's a trap. But Jaime keeps his opinion to himself that the man's main concern was taking Brienne's gold, growing increasingly irritated at being ignored by her. Brienne assigns the plow horse to herself, giving the valuable gray palfrey to Sir Cleos, and leaves Jaime with the old one-eyed gelding, eliminating any chance he might have had of escaping. Another clever move by Brienne. Let Jaime have the horse that obviously he can't escape with. The man and the boy watch them depart as the man wishes them luck and invites them to return in better times, while the boy remains silent with his crossbow. Jaime advises the boy to learn the spear or maul instead of relying on a crossbow, but the boy responds only with suspicion. As they ride east along the moonlit Red Fork, Sir Cleos repeatedly complains about losing the chance to sleep in a comfortable bed. But Jaime enjoys being mounted again, reflecting that the last time he had ridden a horse was when his horse was killed during the capture at the Whispering Wood. And Cleos, sometimes you just gotta learn to shut up. You've basically been saved from likely being captured and maybe becoming a hostage or killed or something along those lines. And obviously Jaime, he's been in jail for so long. He hasn't rid a horse. He hasn't even really been outside much in the last year or so. So probably a great feeling for him. Jaime notes that the Red Fork is broad and shallow in this area, bordered by mud and reeds, while Jaime's old gelding consistently drifts towards Good Eye. At the burned village, they find the fork in the road the man described. One road heads southeast into the woods, while the other runs straight south. After briefly considering both options, Brienne chooses the southern road. Sir Cleos objects because it's the route the man specifically warned them to avoid, but Brienne explains that the man was not truly an innkeeper and seemed far too interested in where they planned to travel. She suspects the wooded route may be a trap because forests are common hiding places for outlaws, and the man could have been directing them toward accomplices. Jaime agrees with her reasoning, suggesting that the man's associates likely own the horses that they purchased. Brienne also considers that the man may have lied about the river route being unsafe in order to persuade them to buy the horses, but she was unwilling to risk it. She believes the river crossings, particularly the Ruby Ford and Crossroads, are likely occupied by soldiers. Jaime is impressed by her judgment and admits to himself that, while unattractive, she is not as foolish as he once thought. You start to see as Jaime begins to respect Brienne a bit more, because someone like Cleos, who's not very intelligent, he's not very smart, isn't picking up on these things. You know, you're in war, and there's obvious signs that you have to be wary of, and Brienne basically picks up exactly what this guy was trying to do to her. Lead her into the woods where they would likely have been killed or kidnapped, all their things would have been taken, go the way that he doesn't know where you're going to go. And obviously, everywhere you go has risks, so why not take the place where people don't know where you're going? As we get into page 127, Brienne spots the lights of a stone tower house in the distance and leads the group off the road through the fields to avoid it. Once they're safely past the stronghold, they return to the road and continue traveling. Brienne keeps them moving for much of the night before finally deciding it is safe to stop and rest. They make camp in a small grove of oak and ash trees beside a slow-moving stream. Refusing to risk attracting attention, Brienne forbids them from lighting a fire. Their meal consists only of the stale oat cakes and saltfish purchased at the inn. As the night is quiet and peaceful, with moonlight, stars overhead, distant wolves howling, and only occasional nervous sounds from the horses. Jaime reflects that the war seems to not have reached this particular place and feels grateful to be alive and moving closer to Cersei. At this point, the group is moving, and they're trying to avoid being seen, obviously, and this chapter feels a lot like Arya's first chapter, where they're trying to avoid being caught by the Boltons, and it's so interesting because the two plot lines have a deep reflection of themselves. Jaime and Brienne are moving closer to Harrenhal while Arya is trying to move away from it. But also there's a nice reflection in the idea that Jaime and Brienne, being adults and understanding how people might try to manipulate them, they are actively moving away from the Brotherhood without banner, or being caught by them, avoiding that trap. But Arya and her company in the next chapter are going to fall into that trap. So you do kind of see that, right? You see the reflection of those two plot lines specifically, which I really love. They have the same type of vibes as well as seeing the horrors of war and the things that have occurred in the Riverlands. And for Jamie, it has to feel like he's getting closer to home. He's getting close. He's making it. Unfortunately, some things are going to pop up. Brienne takes the first watch while Sir Cleos quickly falls asleep. Sitting beneath an oak tree, Jamie wonders what Cersei and Tyrion are doing, as Jamie asks Brienne whether she has any siblings, and she replies that she was her father's only child. Jamie jokes that she should have said she was her father's only son, mocking her masculine appearance and behavior, because Brienne almost slips up. Like, she wanted to say that she was her father's only son, but she says child, obviously. And Brienne has this identity crisis where she just doesn't fit into the traditional woman. She doesn't fit into being a lady type. And it's interesting because you kind of see that Jamie didn't start this conversation wanting to make fun of Brienne, and you can kind of see the growing respect and bond. Jamie is just asking her a general question, but still, Jamie is this man that has not been humbled, who can still be an asshole. There's still this rift between the two. And you see that here, where Jamie continues to play on Brienne's deepest insecurity. Brienne reacts angrily but says nothing, gripping her sword hilt tightly. Jamie unexpectedly apologizes, saying he did not mean to offend her. But Brienne dismisses the apology and calls him Kingslayer. So again, you see the two, that they have these preconceptions about the other, and it's causing them not to really be cordial with each other. Even when Jamie seems like he's making a reach out to make a peace with Brienne, he ruins it. And Brienne, all she can see in Jamie is a Kingslayer, this dishonorable man and horrible guy, and you totally can understand that. Even though we know who Jamie is going to become in this book, Jamie at multiple points already in this book has thought about killing Brienne. So is Brienne wrong to think the way she's thinking about Jamie as of right now? Well, I don't know. It's a very deep issue because Jamie is also a flawed man. He has things about him that are very positive, but he's also a very negative individual. And that is what I think is so interesting about Jamie in the books versus the show. Obviously, he has a great arc in the show, and we'll talk about this a lot more when we get to Harrenhal with Jamie. But in the book, we're inside of his head. We know all the deeper and darker thoughts that he has, that it makes him likable sometimes, but incredibly dislikable at other times. Jamie complains about the title of Kingslayer and asks why she hates him so much when she has never personally harmed her. Brienne answers that he harmed those he swore to protect, including the weak, the innocent, and even King Aerys. Jamie grows irritated that the discussion always returns to Aerys and tells her not to judge what she does not understand. And Jamie is not just talking to Brienne, he's talking to everyone. He's talking to the audience, how we've perceived Jamie for all of these books. He's talking about what he's experienced his entire life. Jamie and Brienne are so similar in that regard. Brienne has always been regarded as this weird woman who is dressing up like a man and she's trying to be a knight, and Jamie has been marked by him killing Aerys his entire life, and neither one is truly understood by each other or anyone at large. And I think that's a bonding point. That's a connection point that we'll see in the future. When Brienne starts to correct him about her name again, Jamie interrupts and insults her appearance, calling her ugly and tedious. And that right there is the key to Jamie. You can have these moments where we start to question who he is and who this man is, and then he goes back to insulting Brienne. Brienne refuses to be provoked into losing her temper, and she instead asks why Jamie joined the Kingsguard and accepted the White Cloak if he intended to betray everything it represented. Jamie replies that he was only 15 years old and viewed being chosen for the Kingsguard as an enormous honor for someone so young. As we get into page 128, Brienne dismisses Jamie's explanation for joining the Kingsguard, saying that calling it an honor is not a real answer. Now, this is going to get Jamie to think about why did he become part of the Kingsguard. It's some great writing for Cersei and Jamie, and even just Robert's Rebellion as a whole. There's a lot to discuss there right away, because Brienne views Jamie as he's always been this horrible guy, that he has no shred of honor or loyalty or anything like that. We know that not to be true, but it does bring up an interesting point. Why join the Kingsguard? If this is what you're truly about. And it's such a deep issue that we're going to get one of the best, I would say, parts of the early chapters is Jaime reflecting on why did he become part of the Kingsguard. Jaime reflects that the true reason was Cersei. Their father had brought her to court hoping to arrange a royal marriage and repeatedly refused other suitors while keeping her close. During this period, Jaime served as a squire to Sir Sumner Crakehall, later earning his knighthood while fighting the Kingswood Brotherhood. When Jaime briefly returned to King's Landing, Cersei secretly told him that Tywin intended to marry him to Lysa Tully and had already begun discussions with Hoster. Cersei proposed a way around the marriage. Jaime could join the Kingsguard, allowing him to remain near her permanently. She pointed out that a vacancy had opened after the death of Sir Harlan Grandison and argued that King Aerys would likely want a young replacement. Jaime worried that her father would never allow it, but Cersei insisted Aerys would not seek Tywin's permission and that Tywin could not openly challenge the king's choice. She used the example of Sir Ilyn Payne, whose tongue Aerys had torn out, to demonstrate that even Tywin could not openly oppose the king. Jaime hesitated because joining the Kingsguard meant surrendering everything. He couldn't have Casterly Rock, he could never have children, he couldn't have any of that. He'd be giving up a ton just to be near Cersei. Cersei forced him to choose between inheritance and her, asking whether he wanted the rock or her. They spent the nights together in a secluded inn on Eel Alley, where Cersei disguised herself as a serving girl to avoid attention. Jaime remembers the encounter as one of the most passionate nights they ever shared, with Cersei repeatedly waking him up after he fell asleep. By morning, giving up Casterly Rock seemed a small sacrifice for her, meant staying close to her, and he agreed to the plan. After a month later, a royal raven arrived at Casterly Rock, informing Jaime that he had been chosen for the Kingsguard and was ordered to take his vows at the tourney of Harrenhal. So let's break down that part of the story first. That was a lot of information that I wanted to get through, but I wanted to talk about Cersei's plot with Jaime first before we dive into the rest. So right away, it's really interesting because it opens up a lot of doors of conversation. One, Tywin planning to marry Jaime to Lysa. I've talked a lot about the Robert's Rebellion on my main channel, but one thing I really enjoyed on that channel, one of my favorite series I've ever done, was on Robert's Rebellion. And one of the key points I laid out about what was happening in the country was there was basically like this defensive pact that was starting to build up, especially in the kingdoms in the north. You had the Tullys, you had the Starks, the Baratheons, and the Arryns were all kind of intermingling with marriage pacts, and people were being warded off to one another. And now you have this idea that the Lannisters were also trying to do this. The Lannisters are trying to marry into the Martells as well. So there's this interesting dynamic where you start to see that all the major houses were starting to marry into each other, and it almost feels like they all saw the war that was coming. They all saw what Aerys was. And The Knight of the Seven Kingdoms did a really good job of showing how the Targaryens were starting to lose a lot of their respect. They did not have the stranglehold over the people like they had when maybe they had the dragons and they had more respect. They were viewed more as gods than they were men. You started to see that. So that's one part of it that I find really fascinating. The other part of it is obviously Jaime and Cersei's relationship. You start to understand the relationship a lot better. You start to see that Jaime, in a lot of ways, has not really controlled his life. He's been almost thrust into it. And the one time he made a defining choice, which was killing Aerys and saving everyone in King's Landing, he was put down for that. But with this whole Cersei plot, what is it about? In a lot of ways, it's Cersei using sex to manipulate Jaime to give up his entire life, basically. And I think that's a really interesting point that has a nice payoff by the end of the next book as well. So there's some really nice groundwork here for Robert's Rebellion, Jaime as a character, Cersei as a character, Tywin as a character, even Aerys as a character. A lot of great building there. And these are the parts of Jaime's storyline that I think everyone loves so much, and I do as well. But joining the Kingsguard freed Jaime from the proposed marriage to Lysa Tully, but the rest of the plan failed. Tywin reacted with fury, resigning as Hand of the King and returning to Casterly Rock, taking Cersei with him. Instead of allowing Jaime and Cersei to remain together, the appointment merely separated them and swapped their locations. Jaime was left alone at court serving King Aerys while a succession of short-lived hands attempted to fill Tywin's role. He remembers the various hands more by their heraldry than their faces. as they rose and fell so quickly. One hand bearing a horn of plenty sigil, and another with dancing griffins were exiled, while another whose sigil showed a mace and dagger was burned alive in wildfire. The final hand before the rebellion was Lord Rosart, an alchemist elevated largely because he shared Eris's obsession with fire. Jaime reflects that he killed Rosart by gutting him, and bitterly thinks it might have been better if he had drowned him instead. So a little bit more lore into Robert's rebellion. So that was the thing that broke the camel's back, more or less. And so that is a really important part to understand, that Cersei had a major role in that point of Robert's rebellion. A lot more foreshadowing to the stupid mistakes she will make in A Feast for Crows. But also, we get some lore into the hands of the king. I don't believe we get a mention of John Connington for a little while yet. I don't think he's been mentioned in the books up to this point, but again, a little bit of foreshadowing to that character as well in Book 5. As we get into page 129, Jaime tries to explain himself by pointing out that Brienne never knew Targaryen personally. But Brienne refuses to excuse Jaime's actions, arguing that regardless of Aerys's cruelty and madness, he was still the lawful king who Jaime had sworn to protect. Jaime replies that he knows exactly what oaths he swore and what he did. He turns the accusation back on Brienne, noting that she too stands accused of killing the king she served, Renly. That to me is a fantastic point of writing here for George, because here's Brienne who's judging Jaime off of things that she doesn't understand. She doesn't know what Jaime's motivations were. She didn't know who Aerys really was or the things he was planning, and we know exactly why Jaime did the things that he did. But Jaime's not going to throw that back at Brienne. Jaime doesn't know what happened to Renly. He's just guessing. He's doing this mainly to make her angry, but in a lot of ways it shows how similar these two characters are. Brienne will have to live with the fact that a lot of people believe she had something to do with Renly's death. It connects them so close together that I don't think Brienne or Jaime even realizes it yet. But it's these seeds that George is building that makes these two characters in the pairing so fascinating. Brienne angrily denies harming Renly and vows to kill anyone who claims otherwise. Jaime points out that Sir Cleos believes she killed Renly and has been spreading that version of events. Brienne insists that Lady Catelyn witnessed the murder and saw a shadow appear as the candles guttered and the air turned cold. Jaime mocks the explanation, sarcastically saying he should have blamed a shadow when he was found standing over Aerys's corpse. And this to me is fantastic, because what Jaime is kind of telling her is, it's kind of wisdom and advice to her, even if she's not taking it, or even if Jaime doesn't believe it to be that. He's kind of telling her, you can't kill everyone. Most people are going to believe that you killed Renly over some shadow thing killed him. Even if Brienne is telling the truth, no one's going to believe her. Same thing of what Jaime truly believes. Jaime believes that even if he told the truth of what actually happened, of why he killed Aerys, no one would believe him, no one would care. It's the exact same rationale that's being used here that I think is so perfect. Jaime continuing to taunt her, he jokingly asks whether the Starks or Stannis paid her to kill Renly, whether Renly rejected her, or whether she acted because she was emotional and angry. Brienne nearly loses her temper, but ultimately restrains herself. Instead of lashing out, she says that being a knight is a rare and precious honor, and that serving in the Kingsguard is an even greater privilege. She accuses Jaime of disgracing both his knighthood and the white cloak of the Kingsguard. Jaime realizes that Brienne deeply desires the honor and recognition of true knighthood, something she can never formally attain because she is a woman. And that will also build up the idea of, hey, if we ever see Brienne get knighted by someone, say, like Jaime, similar to something they did in the show, plotting the seeds there. But also it is the idea that, like, Brienne, she values those things so highly, and what she sees in Jaime is the opposite. And she's going to come to realize that Jaime has those qualities, albeit he's a very conflicted man, a very misunderstood, but also understood man because of both his positive and negative qualities. But Jaime has just hit on all of Brienne's biggest insecurities, and that will continue to drive them apart for now. But Jaime rejects the idea that anything was handed to him because of him being a man or his station, reminding her that he has won attorney melee at 13 while still a squire. Jaime recalls fighting alongside Sir Arthur Dayne against the Kingswood Brotherhood at age 15 and being knighted by Dayne himself on the battlefield. He argues that the Kingsguard did not elevate him, rather, serving in the Kingsguard was what corrupted and stained him. The exchange ends with Jaime bitterly insulting Brienne, claiming that her resentment comes from envying honors she can never possess. And in a lot of ways, Jaime is right to an extent. I think it's more than that, but I think that's part of it. And another thing I think is really interesting is Jaime's entire foundation of his speech that he's going to have at Harrenhal is found in that little speech he just gave to Brienne. Jaime is saying that when I was a knight, I wasn't corrupted by all of these different oaths and things. I was, in his own mind, a good person. It's when you introduce the Kingsguard, the idea that now you have to not protect your family. It's the added on idea of the Kingsguard vows that corrupted him, that made him question what was his duty, who is he supposed to be, because he has so many conflicting interests between Cersei, his family, protecting the innocent and the weak, but all that's supposed to be put to the side for Aerys. We all see where that's going to lead in the future. It's just great foreshadowing and build-up by George. Brienne gives Jaime a look of pure hatred and realizes she would gladly kill him if not for the oath she swore to Catelyn. Fed up with what he sees as self-righteous judgment, Jaime is pleased that he has angered her. Brienne walks away without another word, ending the argument. Jaime wraps himself in the cloak and hopes to dream of Cersei. And it's interesting because he goes to sleep thinking of Cersei. And we just had this story of what Cersei did and how that got him into the Kingsguard. And in a direct continuation, that also led to Aerys' death, what Jaime would be forced to do. As he then goes into a dream of killing Aerys Targaryen. He remembers entering the throne room wearing his golden armor and carrying a bloody sword, noting bitterly that people only remember the white cloak of the Kingsguard. Yeah, they don't understand Jaime's confliction. They don't understand that on one hand, the gold armor represents his loyalty to his family, to House Lannister, but also, maybe protecting the people or whatnot. They only remember the other side of that. The white cloak, his vow to the king. Aerys notes the blood on Jaime's blade and immediately assumes it belongs to Tywin Lannister, whom he considers a traitor. The king raves about traitors and demands Tywin's head, threatening to burn everyone else as well. Aerys mentions Rosart believing his hand has gone to deal with enemies inside the city, but Jaime reveals that the blood on his sword is Rosart's. The news shocks Aerys, who realizes something has gone terribly wrong. Panicked, Aerys loses control of his bowels and runs towards the Iron Throne. Jaime drags him down from the steps of the throne as he kills Aerys with a single slash across the throat. Jaime remembers being struck by how easy it was, thinking that a king should die harder than that. He reflects that Rosart at least attempted to defend himself, though poorly. Jaime notes that no one ever asked about Rosart's death because Rosart was lowborn and insignificant despite briefly serving as hand of the king. Sir Ellis Westerling, Lord Craigcall, and the other Lannister knights enter the throne room in time to witness the aftermath. Their arrival makes it impossible for Jaime to disappear or conceal what he has done. Jaime immediately recognizes that history will blame him for killing the king. Roland Craigcall informs him that the city and castle belong to the Lannisters, but Jaime reflects that this is only partly true, as fighting is still taking place throughout the Red Keep and city. Gregor Clegane and Amory Lorch are attacking Maegor's Holdfast, while Ned Stark and his Northmen are entering King's Landing. Craigcall does not seem shocked to find Aerys dead, likely because everyone knew Jaime was Tywin Lannister's son long before he became one of Aerys' Kingsguard. So let's talk about this story before we get to the finish. It's an amazing story, because we'd only heard about Aerys' death through point of views like Daenerys and Ned, and so you're seeing it now from the man who killed the last Targaryen king himself. And it paints a very interesting picture, because we don't know the exact context behind it. George is kind of teasing you with it. He uses language like, Aerys sent Rosart to go deal with the enemies within the city. What does that mean exactly? Right? Like, he's not giving us the full idea there. He's saving that for later with Jaime's speech. But it's giving you the idea and the context that you don't know everything of what happened here. And it gets you to question that. And obviously this is great world building for Robert's Rebellion, and it has so much relevance to Jaime's story as a whole, because Jaime does something that on one hand we view as very dishonorable, but also as one of his best deeds. He saved millions of people, and yet he's remembered as a villain. And that's exactly what this chapter is really establishing for the second half of Jaime and Brienne's arc here. I love that idea. And, obviously Jaime can't get away, and so he has to face what he's just done. And so that'll get us into page 131, the last of the chapter. Jaime orders Craigcall to spread word that Aerys is dead and to spare any defenders who surrender, taking them prisoner instead of slaughtering them. Craigcall asks whether he should also proclaim a new king, leaving open the possibility of Tywin Lannister, Robert Baratheon, or another Targaryen claimant. Jaime briefly considers the surviving Targaryens, including Viserys on Dragonstone, and the infant Aegon still in Maegor's Holdfast, with Elia. He imagines a future where a new Targaryen king reigns with Tywin Lannister serving as hand, knowing how that would piss off Ned and Robert to no end. For a moment, he is tempted by the idea, but looking down at Aerys' corpse reminds him that Viserys and Aegon carry the same blood as the Mad King. Refusing to involve himself further, Jaime tells Craig-Hall to proclaim whoever he wants. Jaime then climbs the Iron Throne and sits upon it with his sword laid across his knees, waiting to see who will come to claim the kingdom. The first major lord to arrive is Eddard Stark. Remembering that moment, Jaime bitterly thinks that Ned Stark had no more right to judge him than Brienne does now. If you're Jaime, it's so interesting because he had the possibility to declare whoever he wanted to be king. Now, I actually don't think that this would have made much sense. If Jaime would have said, oh, let's put Aegon on the throne, it wouldn't have mattered. Jaime didn't have the power to back that up. He could have declared it, and then the other leaders would have had to decide what to do with that. But obviously, at this point of the war, it was pretty clear that Robert was going to become king. Ned was not going to take the throne. Tywin could have tried to take the throne, but I don't think he would have kept it. I don't think that Robert and Ned would have probably allowed that, given what just happened. So I don't really think that this would have mattered that much on who he actually declared, but I think it goes to show more about Jaime. Jaime knows what Aerys just did. Now, we as an audience, we don't know everything that Aerys has just ordered, his Hand of the King, Rosart, to do. But I think it's interesting to understand that Jaime looks at it and goes, you know what? I don't want anyone on the throne that has any relation to Aerys. It's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out if Daenerys comes over and Jaime is still alive. But Jaime goes, you know what? Screw it. I don't want to play any more of these political games. I've done what I've done, and let me just wait and see what happens. And obviously, the reason I think he dreams of this is because it's so similar to the conversation he just had with Brienne. All she knows is this general story that everybody knows, and is judging him for it, not knowing the full context, the same way that Ned already did without even speaking to Jaime. Really relevant. It's an amazing setup to later on in this book. But to end out the chapter, his sleep is filled with disturbing dreams in which the dead appear surrounded by green wildfire flames. In the dream, Jaime fights them with a gold sword, but for every enemy he defeats, 2 more rise to replace him. Now, before he wakes up, this could be some big foreshadowing to the fact that Jaime will be involved in fighting the others, and he may die in the attempt. Some people have gone as far to say that maybe he's Azor Ahai or some part of that prophecy. You could also make the idea that this is foreshadowing that Cersei will eventually use wildfire at King's Landing. Could also be foreshadowing to Daenerys if she does some sort of sacking of King's Landing, and maybe, in that wildfire goes off. A lot of possible foreshadowing to things that could happen in the future. But at this, Brienne wakes him up by kicking him in the ribs. It is still dark outside and rain has begun to fall. The group eats a simple breakfast of oatcakes, saltfish, and blackberries that Sir Cleos found. But before sunrise, they mount their horses and continue their journey south. So thank you guys all for watching this chapter analysis or reread. This was a really fun one. It was a really enjoyable chapter, especially all of Jaime's are awesome as we get more and more into Robert's Rebellion than we ever have really in the first 2 books at all. Jaime is a fascinating character, so is Brienne. I mean, I think both characters are amazing in this book for their development and how they grow as individuals, but also like they grow together. Just an amazing storyline. It's one of the reasons that most people love A Storm of Swords as their favorite book, and I cannot fault them at all. So I hope to see you guys all back for episode 13 next week, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.